The Store Showdown season is well underway. We're approaching planetary qualifiers, and on top of both of those, we have a huge variety of different tournaments, 1Ks and otherwise, being held throughout the world. If you're a fan of competitive Star Wars Unlimited, you're eating well. Welcome back, everyone. Red Cap's Corner recently hosted the first Store Showdown of the season, at least for us locally, and it gave us a glimpse into what we may see at the planetary qualifiers and, of course, throughout the remainder of the season. Set 2 has thrown a lot of things at us, and there are some distinct patterns available within the tournament results, and we're going to look at them right now. For the overall field, there were total 21 competitors, a little bit lower than we typically see for these sort of events, including the previous 1K. But of the players that came out, we had a pretty interesting set of decks. Truth be told, there was an enormous amount of aggro, a lot of Sabine, a bunch of yellow Bobas, and other things of other varieties, spoiler alert for later, that would fall into the aggressive category. Whether this pans out for the rest of the season is up for debate. Personally, I'm not surprised at all, and I even said it at the event and definitely after the event that I should have anticipated this, and I sort of was, and then second guessed myself. I'm of the opinion Sabine is the de facto best deck, and it is the deck to beat. And as a result of both the meta itself as well as the tournament structure, I personally would not walk into the room with a Blue X deck, almost independent of what it is. There are some that are more viable than others, but hard control, you're in for a rough time for at least the foreseeable future if these results continue to pan out in this way. Now, the top 8 itself was surprisingly diverse. The conversion rate on those Sabine decks maybe wasn't quite what all those players were hoping for, but we did get some interesting lists showing up. Now, I don't have the original top 8 placings for how everybody was after Swiss. All I know is that, hey, this guy got 5-0 with Boss Green. We're going to look at 8th to 1st place and break down the lists themselves. So the first up is Han 2 ECL, which is interesting. There have been a number of either ECL or Han 2 30s, but green specifically, that have been making waves here and there as an alternative red-green aggressive deck. If you bring that topic up, people are naturally going to gravitate towards Sabine, but there are some interesting things that Han presents that Sabine can't quite do. Namely, you get chunkier stuff, just kind of by definition, and you can have the opportunity to power them out. This list kind of treads the line between the aggro and the ramp versions, being a little more mid-rangey. I played against this player in the 1K, I played against them at locals, and I played them again in the top 8 at this particular event. And this deck has been putting in work for them. It does seem at first glance a little bit all over the place. You have some early game in the Sabines and the red 3s, but you also have ramp plays in what's now kind of the classic Reckless Gunslinger off Han Solo play into Spark of Hope to get that turn 1, build yourself a resupply. You know, pretty much all toys, some assembly required. Now, from there, we do have a smattering of other aggressive tools and things that you'd expect to see in Han 2 lists. I mean, K2 shows up in the blue versions as well. Cassian is completely reasonable in these lists, although I'm interested to find out why it's only 2. Presumably, that's just a space issue. Double up on the tech, because tech is, as I mentioned elsewhere, it's like a draw 8. When it comes out. Yeah, that may not literally be the case, but you draw a freakish amount of cards, air quotes draw, when you get tech. If you untap with it and play, you're in a great position. In some matchups, that can immediately win the game or get you back in the game. Now, from there, we have a variety of different things that leverage the ECL or the 2 copies of Timely Intervention. You have Sundari Peacekeeper, and of course you have the Poe Wrecker combo, which can do mean things. That's before you consider, oh, hey, yeah, I'll just K2. Any of those that are coming out with ambush, you can definitely present some immediate threats. As we look towards the top end of things, past the wreckers, U-Wing and Crate round out the top of the curve. U-Wing we've seen in many occasions before. That kind of explains the Echo-based defenders. But notably, off of the U-Wing, you can get a huge number of native ambushers in the modded cohorts and even Marauder. So whether you need a Sentinel or you need an Ambusher, you do have some opportunities off of U-Wing to immediately impact the board. The Crate Dragons are just, I don't want to say an oops, I win, but there are a lot of matchups where that thing can come down accelerated because of Han and just, all right, stop me. And a lot of decks are not going to be able to answer it. Interestingly, beyond all of those cards, we have Daring Raids to help stabilize things, presumably. You can aim it at face if really necessary. But I will also call out the Bright Hopes, which were a nightmare for me because, hey, I was playing Bosk and bouncing my bounties, it kind of feels bad for me. Just throwing that out there. Now, when we look at the board, you have access to Spark of Rebellion, Scanning Officer, Admiral Akbar, Disabling Fangfighter, and Home 1. Some of these I'm a little surprised to not see in the main, namely Home 1, but it's probably just hedging against particular matchups, being able to compete with those aggressive decks like Sabine, as well as present a significant quantity of threats when we're talking about mid-range and control. Clearly, Spark can come in to help against those aforementioned control decks, the Sabling Fang Fighters, whether it's Darksaber or it's Bounties, going to pick stuff off. Admiral Akbar probably also comes in against aggro in order to help stabilize the board. The Scanning Officer is interesting, and I have to wonder if this particular player was going up against like a lot of Hondo or something. There are notable smuggle cards. I mean, this deck is running them, playing Timely, and a variety of other decks either run Timely or, Hotshot Blasters, things like that. But Scanning Officer feels a little bit extreme because the math just kind of doesn't work out that way, that I think you're going to hit something very often. So I'd love to hear if this performed well for them, either in testing or on the day, or would they keep it around? Next up is something near and dear to my heart, and that's Bosk, but not my Bosk. Well, my Bosk isn't my Bosk anyway. We'll explain that when we get there. But this particular list is leaning more into the ramp aspect. If you saw Red-Green Vader in set 1, this is the new iteration. And realistically, given the way that the meta has evolved and the way the cards that have been released have, been released, I get it. I don't really see a big advantage to playing Vader over Bosk. Even if you discount all of the bounties, the fact of the matter is that Bosk just comes out faster and can impact the board long before a Vader. Now, this particular list is opting for Death Star Stormtroopers to help control the early game, notably only 2 Force Chokes. It's something that it's a necessary evil. Sabine has 5 health, for example, and making sure that they don't land a Darksaber is a huge deal. The other early game pieces absolutely make sense. The combination of bounties also is completely reasonable. The Death Mark will come in periodically, and whether it's just allowing for a ping or to help you catch up or get ahead in certain slower matchups. Notably, only 2 resupply, leaning heavy on the super laser tech. I get it. I played versions of Bosk that had essentially 2 price and, or not essentially, they had 2 price and 3 super laser techs, but this is going to 8 because of the resupply. You don't want to overdo it, but resupply is that guaranteed ramp where you have to jump through hoops for the other one. Open fire to help supplement the Force Chokes as the early game control pieces. Here's where people will probably get confused. The client. If you look at the density of 3 cost or less units, there's a significant number of them. We started with Stormtrooper, but it continues through, the client, Phase 3, Super Laser Tech, Punishing One, and Black Sun Starfighter. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Kylo, which is really just a 3-2 attack. The reason the client is there is because you can cheat it out with Bounty Hunter's Quarry without having to pay the aspect penalty. Obviously, in conjunction with Bosk, this probably helps stabilize the aggro matchups. Will it stabilize it? I was talking to this player throughout the event and after the event, and while I love the idea, it's tough. I've been very hit or miss with the client overall in set 2, and I do appreciate the power for it, but it kind of feels like it's the nail in the coffin. You need to already be in a good position, then the client comes down and it completely locks your opponent out of the game. Not necessarily win more, but it's not going to save you, generally speaking. That being said, I do think it's pretty cool tech. Now, beyond that, we of course have Overwhelming Barrage, notably only 2 Ruthless Raiders, a card that I personally find pivotal against Blue X decks. But then we have a huge top end in 3 Vaders, 2 Mauls, 3 Palpatines, and 2 Krayt Dragons. In a meta where you're expecting probably more Kiras, more Han 2s, things like that, this will probably perform fairly well. You're going to be able to ramp into these big threats and just have a constant stream of them, essentially. They deal with Vader, you play Maul. They deal with Maul, you got a Krayt Dragon. They've somehow, they're not dealing with all those. It's the bottom line. The game would have to end. Now, going to the board, we have top targets on the board: Disabling Fang Fighters, Pillage, Palpatine's Return, and Relentless. The latter four definitely coming in against Control, probably, and the Pillage as well. I'd be curious how the Pillage had done, simply because with only 2 discard cards, like you're not featuring Force Throw, you don't have No Bargain or any of these other options. Is it coming up enough? Because against something like Han 2, you can definitely shut them down on a crucial turn, or even other decks. There are tons of decks that will really cut it close, and you might be able to strip away their entire hand with a Pillage, but you can always draw out of it. I feel like I'd rather have a higher threat density, because that is 100% impacting the board, but got him a top 8 berth. It's got to be doing something. Disabling Fangfighter we talked about with the previous list definitely makes sense here. Is it enough? I would like to have seen the third Force Choke somewhere in here to help fight those Sabines. But the Disabling Fangfighter can be claimed off of Quarry, so you have to keep that in mind if you can set up a Quarry play on their flip turn. Personally, I feel like that's asking a lot if you don't just draw it, but it is a body that interacts with space, which typically these decks are very soft in space. And then lastly, the top targets, which I'll admit to thinking were very slow, but in practice, they actually work out very well, and you can claim, double claim the bounty with Bosk, heal 12. More on that later. It doesn't guarantee a win, but good job. Well done. In 6th place, we have Sabine. I told you there were a lot of them. Law of averages, there were going to be a few that make it. There are some notable things here. First up is the Pumps Missing Metal Ceremony. That's unique. I prefer at this stage Metal Ceremony lists. Only 2 Rebel Assault and 2 Heroic Sacrifice, kind of splitting the difference there instead of going all in or one or the other. Naturally, they're better in certain scenarios. Heroic Sacrifice, as we talked before, about control matchups, whereas Rebel Assault is better against aggro. Other aggro, notably keeping a Timely Intervention in here. I still like Timelies in this list. X-Wings are making an appearance, something that some players have shied away from, but there is a shaved copy of Red 3. Where did that copy go? Well, there's a tech in this list, which is bold. I would love to know how often that tech did anything. In all seriousness, like, the body is fine. Like, if you play tech and then next turn play the Darksaber on it, all right. He has 5 health. He might be difficult to remove, that sort of thing. You could tech and then Wing Leader, and all of a sudden he's a Force 7. But he's not a Rebel, so you're not getting the extra benefit of Fleet Lieutenant. He is hero side, so he doesn't screw with the numbers for a cause I believe in, but how often is this guy allowing you to smuggle anything meaningful that you couldn't already do? Like, you're probably already rowing the Cassian Andors, so can't you just smuggle them? I don't know. I would love to hear about this. But some other spice that's in the main deck is notably only 2 Darksabers. I wonder if that is a collection constraint or an intentional choice. But more importantly are the spaceships. We have Valiant Assault Ship and a Delphi Patrol Wing. The Valiant Assault Ship I have seen in a few Lando lists when people were tinkering around with that. It is a space saboteur. It does notably have 4 health, so it can either punch completely through Black Sun Starfighter or punch through it in a different way. You get where I'm going with it. You will, of course, thanks to Wrecker, be able to set up cute tricks with the on attack. It's interesting. I haven't seen this show up too much, although it is something always on the periphery. Next up, however, I have been seeing a lot of, and people I test with have been loving this thing, and that's a Delphi Patrol Wing. It is a Ruthless Raider plus Fleet Lieutenant, which is bonkers when you think about it. It obviously doesn't have all of that, but the body is relevant because it doesn't get hit by Fell. It doesn't get hit by Takedown, at least natively. And then it also has a Fleet Lieutenant with some caveats. But this thing seems really, really strong, and I'm surprised more people aren't running it, but we do have it appearing here. Now to the board, we have the extra Rebel Assault, Sundari Peacekeepers, Disabling Fangfighter, another Tech, and U-Wing. Some of these are more obvious than others. Some of them are callbacks, like the U-Wing. The Tech, just go back and listen to everything I said. I would love to know when this came in and how well it did. Disabling Fangfighters could be useful against a variety of different things, whether it is Bosk or it is even the mirror. Sundari Peacekeeper, I imagine this is for the mirror. I'm told by Sabine players that they don't love this thing. I'm not sure either way, personally. I see people waffle back and forth about whether they love this thing or hate it. Obviously, ECL, great. Not ECL, maybe it's a little clunky, but we'll see. And lastly, the Rebel Assault. I'm a little surprised. Again, we didn't see the other pumps. The techs seem like interesting tech, but it got him 6th place, so congratulations. Finishing in 5th place, we have Boba Green, notably not ECL. This is a different take on, I didn't actually count the deck list. SwooDB says it's 50 cards. I'll take SwooDB's word on it. It's not the 54 card list from the UK, but it is in that vein, very underworld heavy, notably leaning into double Boba's armor. I will call attention to that right off the bat because Boba's armor is something that, I mean, I've said to a lot of people over the last few weeks that no one's playing it. I'm not going to worry about it. And it has been creeping up in numbers to the point where I think you got to respect that your opponent probably has it, even if they haven't demonstrated it in a previous game. Now, beyond that, most of the list seems fairly standard. Obviously, some things got shaved in order to get it down to a reasonable card count. Only a singleton, No Good to Me Dead, does seem to be the norm. I'm not a huge fan of that, just because there's so many targets for it, whether it's Sabine with Darksaber or even a Zuckuss. It doesn't matter. There's a number of things that you would love to just lock down. This build is, of course, a little bit slower than Boba Yellow, but it can still put on significant pressure when the time comes. I will, of course, point out, as probably anybody who's played against this or seen it played knows, McClunky and Bazine can absolutely be crippling. Just shred your opponent's hand, but keep in mind, if you play the Bazine, it's a May. You don't have to make them discard and draw one. If their hand is crap, don't give them a chance to draw into more stuff right now. Now, the board does feature the extra No Good to Me Dead, the extra Waylay, Cobb Vanth, as well as Relentless Pursuit, Palpatine's Return, and another Vader. I think these are all logical. You have more late game and redundant late game with the Palpatine's Return and Vader against slower builds, whereas, and additionally Cobb Vanth, because Cobb Vanth also gives you a body inside a body, one of those nesting dolls. The Pursuit allows you to cleanly, air quotes, remove things. Of course, taking something with Boba, the leader, is very important, especially if you slap an armor on it. Playing Cad Bane, which also notably features Relentless Pursuit, gives you insight into how often it is valuable. It does feel incredibly clunky sometimes, so I get putting it in the board, but there are a fair amount of bounty hunters here between the boss and the Bobas, and of course, the Boba. Hell, you could use Greedo if you really had to, I guess. Maybe against Rey with a suited up R2 or something. I don't know, we're kind of reaching here. But giving a shield to your leader, pretty solid. And of course, it does double as equipment removal or upgrade removal, if your opponent slams it onto a unit, say a lightsaber on a Yoda, something like that. The Waylays and No Good to Me Dead, we talked about that earlier. Waylay, of course, also pseudo upgrade removal, and No Good to Me Dead definitely matters against a variety of different things. So congrats on the 5th place. In 4th place, we have Gar Saxon, 30 health version. I don't think I've seen any with Jedha. Now this, and speaking with the pilot, this is an iteration upon the version that actually did very well at Red Cap several weeks ago. And I do like the tweaks that are here. Definitely feels more aggressive, definitely leans into a number of the things the deck was doing well and really hones it. So if you go back and look at the previous lists, I don't believe there was a full set of Lurking Ties in the main. I think that just, oops, I win against so many different things that there's no reason not to. Additionally, just simply having 6 as opposed to only 3 or 5, or some number less than 6, of 3-cost super threatening space units is a big deal. And they are even more threatening here thanks to Gar's additional pressure. At +1/+0 doesn't seem like a lot, but if you played against Krennic in set 1, you know that it adds up. Your opponent can interact with it because, of course, they can ping shields, but that's where things like Snapshot, Hotshot Blaster, Jetpack, all those things come in. Notably, there's also sneak attacks here. There isn't really like a super high end, but sneak attacking in, say, a tie advanced for a discount, so that way you can play other things in the turn, surprise strike or a jetpack out of hand, something like that to allow you to provide additional pressure will catch people off guard. Now, I have to imagine this player was feasting through the field of Sabines. In speaking with both this pilot as well as our final winner, they both felt that they were very capable and favored into Sabine, and it has drawn me to both lists even more than before because, as I mentioned earlier, I personally expect a ton of Sabine at the planetary qualifiers. I don't see any reason why it would drop off. And if these sort of decks can win in that field, as well as oops, I win against other decks, say it's even a bad matchup, you are the aggro, you are inherently going to be more consistent, or you may just be able to outplay your opponent who's playing a mid-range or control deck. I generally lean towards I will accept bad matchups against mid-range and control rather than accepting bad matchups against aggro. But moving on from the main deck, we're looking at Devotion, Triple Dark Raid, Fell the Dragon, Change of Heart, and Cargo Juggernaut out of the board. Not being as familiar with this list, I can only speculate as to where these things are coming in. I mean, Devotion's kind of a duh moment. Triple Dark Raid, a similar thing. I would like to see 3. Now, the Fell and the Change of Heart also presumably are coming in against control, but I'm not sure exactly which things that are the most concerning. I have to imagine Snoke is a big deal. In which case, I wonder, are you better off featuring the Takedown's main deck? Of course, Takedown is more universal, at least by comparison, but do you need to take down that many things that aren't big? I don't know. I got to play this deck more, so we'll have to see. Change of Heart, of course, can allow you to push some damage if they play something big. And Cargo Juggernaut, this is where it gets a little weird. I'm curious whether this is more needed to help stabilize aggro, or it is important to have a 5/6 body that also happens to heal in the slower matchups. Either way, congratulations and very well played. And then we got this jackass in third place. This is me. I've been borrowing Chrono's list for some time now. Shout out to Chrono for putting this together. I have a slightly different variation. Like, this is 2 cards different, maybe. I'm not even sure it's 2 cards different. But this is a more aggressive version of Bosk. If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts about the list, although it may be slightly outdated, like I said, a couple cards different, you can check out my video that I'll put on screen now. After that, we have our second place finisher, our finalist, our runner-up. And they were, shocker, Sporting Sabine. They did knock me out in top 4. I was able to beat one Sabine in Swiss, but then was taken down by this one in the top 4. This particular list feels pretty close to standard. I will point out it is also notably running the Adelphis as well. Full set of red 3s, the cheeky R2 to help in certain scenarios. It either gives you that early turn 1 body, although clearly not ideal, or it can be an extra play on, say, the flip turn to help delay, or on a later turn to just kind of burn an action to try and bait your opponent into doing something. If they pass, maybe you can claim, and then you have a big advantage going into the next turn, that sort of thing. But a very tight list, notably, is also running Metal Ceremonies, full set of Rebel Assaults. Heroic Sacrifices are in the board. Speaking of which, we have also 2 Confiscates, Sundari Peacekeepers, and the Bright Hopes. So Heroic Sacrifice doesn't have a whole lot of extra words that need to be said about it, but Confiscate, Peacekeepers, and Bright Hopes, I guess all the people that were complaining at me that Sundari Peacekeeper isn't good enough in the mirror, I guess it is. It's doing pretty well. We saw 2 lists featuring it already. Confiscate definitely can come in to break the mirror, notably pop their Darksabers or other things that come up. There are still traitorous cards, whatever. The card Traitorous is still showing up periodically in some decks. Should it? I don't know about that, but it is, whether it should or shouldn't. So having it out is good, and of course Bright Hope does help stabilize the mirror as well. Speaking with a number of players on the day, the mirror is very silly. Like very, very, very silly. So any advantage you can get there to help stabilize it in your favor, definitely take those. But very well done on the second place finish. Congratulations. Last, but of course not least, is our first place finisher. And Craig, you got to leave some wins for the rest of us as we keep joking. Craig took down the 1K. Craig took down this event. Craig took down the previous 1K and has been kind of carving a path through all competition. This time, running it back with Kylo Yellow. This is I don't want to say unique, mostly because I've said unique a lot, but it is a different take on Kylo as compared to what many other lists have been trying. And we talked about it in the interview. I'll pop that up on screen if you want to hear Craig's thoughts about the list overall. I think there's a lot of cool things in here. And I think Craig, aside from being a great player, also knew exactly what they wanted to do. They indicated that this has a very strong matchup into Sabine, which I can definitely understand why. Kylo was kind of favored anyway. In my opinion, the Sabine player has to know to shift gears in order to then flip the matchup in their favor once again. But with all of the additional space, and then I was surprised I have my Darksaber as well in Fallen Lightsaber, you can do a lot of mean and nasty things very, very quickly. And then Triple Dark Raid allows you to apply that additional pressure against mid-range and control decks. The Lurking Ties, we talked about it earlier, the 6 3-cost spaceships, and then them getting pumped by TIE Advance. Triple Dark Raid pulling out essentially 6 attack spaceships, whether it's Xanadu Blood or Ruthless Raider, because the Raider does the 2 when it comes in. You can really put the pressure onto your opponent. Now, the sideboard does feature the sneak attacks, which I didn't realize until now were in the sideboard as opposed to the main. Additional options to try and fight those slower builds. The extra arm to the teeth, I'm not sure where that comes in against. So I'd have to ask Craig and find out exactly where that's supposed to be utilized. But you also have Waylay, good catch-all answer, Disabling Fang Fighter. It's kind of a common thread. If you're running red, I guess you run Disabling Fang Fighter out of the board at the very least. And then Kylo's, we spent a significant amount of time explaining why Kylo's are good in this deck in the interview. So congratulations once again, Craig, on taking it down. So those are all the lists from this particular showdown. I'd love to hear from other people what's doing well in their area, what they're afraid of for PQs or otherwise, and what they think they may be running to try and take down the field. I'm still waffling personally. I love playing Bosk. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable playing at an 8+ round tournament, but we'll have to see. There's only a little bit of time left as we're preparing for the planetary qualifiers. But that's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And tune in next time for more Random's Thoughts.